All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My wife and I, Kristen, my wife, is with us this morning, and we were involved in camp and conference ministry for a number of years, for about 15 years all up when we first started working in ministry. And so every time I see that video, the Camp Survivor video, I get super excited. In fact, after the first service, the one that just happened, I went out and made a cup of tea, which I'm a fanatic about tea. I love tea. Made a cup of tea, and I sat down at a table with a couple and their kids, and they told me their story. And their story is that their daughter actually came to Camp Survivor a couple of years ago, and they started coming along to church afterwards and have been coming. So I just think it's a remarkable thing that you guys are doing to serve your community in such an incredible way. I just want to commend you for doing that. I'm a huge camp fan because I spent so much time in camping. And so because of that, I'm also equally a massive games fan. I love playing games. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to start this morning. It'll feel a little bit like camp. I'd like to start with a game, if you don't mind. And if you're able to, I'd like to invite you to stand. Yesterday, I was with some of the team. You can go ahead and stand now. I was with some of the team here, the serve team here at Light Switch, and we played this game, but a different version of the game, okay? So the game is called Face Off, all right? And I'm going to bring up on the screen, my good friend, would you give it up for Josh up the back, by the way? Give Josh a big hand. Josh is going to bring up on the screen a couple of images for us. And this particular edition of Face Off is the speed edition, okay? So here are the two animals that are on the screen. It's an antelope and a cheetah, okay? And you've got to decide by facing in the direction of the animal that you think is the fastest to get through this round, okay? So if you think an antelope is the fastest of the two animals, you're going to face that direction. If you think the cheetah is the fastest of the animals, you're going to face that direction. If you were here for the 9:30 service and you know the answer to it, just a reminder, being a cheetah in church is not the best thing to do, okay? See what I did there? That was a dad joke, by the way. For all you young people in the room, give it time. You'll be able to develop this incredible ability as well to do puns on words all the time. So if you are in church, it's probably not the right place to cheat, okay? So if you were at the 9:30, you might want to just kind of get yourself out at some point during the game, all right? But on the line, by the way, is a box of Cadbury Favorites chocolates, okay? So if you're wondering, should I even be playing a game in church? The answer is yes, and here's the reason why you should be playing, okay? All right, so I'll give you 3 seconds to make your decision. Some people, look at these people in the front row, already on it. They're ready to win the chocolates. I tell you what, they came prepared, all right? So you got 3 seconds to make your decision. If you're still facing me, you'll actually be eliminated from the game. All right, 3, 2, 1. And the answer is, it was the cheetah. Okay, that was a gimme round. By the way, even if you got that one wrong, we're going to let you still play in the second round, okay? We'll let you stay in the second round. That was just to get the game going and for you to figure out how it works. All right, so second round. Here we go, the next round. Fastest man on the planet, okay, recorded. Fastest man on the planet. Some people went straight to this direction. They said they think it's Bolt. Some people are like, I'm not sure. I know he was fast. In fact, I know he had the record, but maybe Blake has beaten him. Who knows? What's that? Oh, fastest man over 100 meters. Thank you for the clarification. Appreciate that. Fastest man over 100 meters. All right, so Bolt this direction, Blake this direction. And if you're too slow, when I get down to 0, then you'll just be out. 3, 2, 1. The answer is Bolt. Okay, yeah, that was a gimme because that was pretty. Maybe not. There's a few people that are already being seated. Okay, all right. Next round, we're talking fastest car on the planet. Okay, now just a quick caveat. This is 2024 data. Okay. And there's always that one person, tends to be guys in every audience, that'll come up to me afterwards and they'll be like, Perko, actually, in 2025, the fastest car. Okay, this is last year, so bear with me, okay? So if you think it's the red one, I can't even pronounce it, you'll face this direction if you think it's the fastest. And this one, the black one, you'll face this direction. This is like fastest 0 to 60 speed is what they gauge this by, all right? You have 3 seconds to make your decision. In 3, there's some people still facing me, very nervous over here. In 2, in 1, 0, the answer is the black car. Okay. Let's see, how'd we go? Wow. That section almost completely eliminated that section. A lot of people over here went with the myth that red is always faster. That's not the case. Not in this case, okay? All right, next one, next round. All right, fastest wind speed ever recorded on land. What a thing to be known for. Isn't that impressive? Well, our state or our town has had the fastest wind speed ever recorded on land. That's why you should come visit us. It's an amazing place. All right, Whitney Wellington almost would be up there, I reckon. Should be on the list. All right, so you've got two options. If you think it's Mount Washington in the great state of New Hampshire in the US, which is where my wife is originally from, by the way, or you might think it's Barrow Island, which is an island off the coast of Western Australia, a mining community. You get 3 seconds to make your decision. A lot more decision making going on. I see people really eyeing these chocolates and trying to make sure they get it right. Okay, in 3, 2, 1, the answer is Barrow Island. Barrow Island. I even saw someone make a last-minute change, and they nailed it. And when they nailed it, they were like cheering, quietly cheering, okay? It doesn't take much to get people in the Hutt Valley going on a Sunday morning, that's for sure. Just a $7 box of chocolates, that's all it takes. All right. Next round, who said this? In the famous movie, Top Gun, who said this? I feel the need for speed. Okay, who said that? Who made that comment in the famous movie Top Gun? You've got 3 seconds to make your decision. If you think it was Goose, you're going to face that direction. If you think it was Maverick, face the other direction. If you're still facing me, you won't win the chocolates, all right? In 3, 2, 1, the answer is they actually both said it. So you're all eliminated from the game. All eliminated from the game. However, the group of people that percentage-wise had the most people still in the game at the end of the game is this big crew up the back. So I reckon I'm going to give it to Micah. Micah, you can share that with your friends, or you can be selfish in church and just keep it to yourself, whatever you'd like to do. No pressure, absolutely no pressure to make the right choice there, Micah. Do whatever you'd like to do. Here's what that game does for us this morning. The game kind of, I think, identifies a thing that's going on in our culture today. I got to tell you, when I was looking for things in the world that were the fastest, I Googled like fastest things on the planet. You would not believe how many things came back up in the Google search, like fastest wind speed ever recorded. There's one, for instance, that I would never have thought of. But then when I Googled this, what's the slowest things on the planet? Here's what I noticed. There was a very small list of things that get measured as the slowest things on the planet. And here's what that tells me, and I think it's obvious. We live in a world that loves and celebrates and even rewards speed. When you think about it, in the workplace, you get rewarded oftentimes because of your efficiency. So if you're really good at something, you'll oftentimes get a promotion. For me, it started at a very early age. I remember as a very young child getting rewarded in the classroom by completing assignments quickly. You may remember this in primary school, the teacher saying, whoever gets fill in the blank done first gets to go to lunch first or gets to go to recess first. Here's the reality. We live in a world that loves and they celebrate and they reward speed and efficiency. And if you're a parent in the room or a teacher in the room, you know this other thing is true as well. What gets rewarded always gets repeated. If you want your child to do something regularly, if you reward them, it's amazing. They start making their bed every morning because they start getting rewarded for it. Or you start giving them an allowance when they do certain chores around the house. All of a sudden, they'll repeat the chores over and over again because they get rewarded with the allowance. What gets rewarded gets repeated. But here's what's happened in my life, and I'll just share with you kind of something that I've noticed in my own life that's happened, and maybe this resonates with you as well. This idea of what gets rewarded gets repeated when it comes to speed has actually created for me in my life what I refer to as artificial urgency. Artificial urgency is simply this. I've created this definition, so this is not some, thing from a medical book or anything like that, but it's the art of making something that isn't urgent, urgent. That's what artificial urgency is. And here's how it's kind of played out in my life. This is kind of like group therapy on a Sunday morning. I'm just sharing with you vulnerably. This is how it's played out in my life. Here's what I've noticed. When I was in primary school, I couldn't wait to be done with primary school and get into high school. Like, I couldn't wait for that to happen. And then when I got my L's, I couldn't wait to get my P's. When I got my P's, I couldn't wait to get off of those and have a regular license. When I was in high school, I couldn't wait to get out of high school. I couldn't wait to go to university. I was so excited to finally be able to study something that I found interesting. Because in high school, they forced me to study a whole bunch of things that I didn't care about. So I studied PE in university, which is basically like a 4-year degree in whistleblowing, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. But I remember while I was at university, I couldn't wait to get out of university and get a real job so I could make real money. Because I thought that if I could start making some real money, I might be able to get myself a real girlfriend, which actually worked out for me. I started dating a real live girlfriend. It was amazing. But I was so excited to be dating this real live girl that I couldn't wait to get married to her. So it only took me 10 weeks. This is not, by the way, what I describe or what I would encourage people to do. But 10 weeks after starting to date her, I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. It's amazing. 25 years later, she's still married to me. It's incredible. And that 10 weeks engaged, or not engaged, but 10 weeks dating, we got engaged, and then we got married. I remember when we got married, my wife and I, we started out our marriage, and we started asking each other, like, hey, when do you think we should start having children? Because we were excited to have kids. And lo and behold, 18 months later, after we were married, we had our first child. And then we had another child, and then we had our third child. And guess what? When you have 5 children under the age of, when you have 3 children, When you have 3, my wife's sitting here going, wait a second, do we have 2 kids we don't know about? No. When you have 3 children under the age of 5, guess what? You can't wait for them to start going to school. And then they started going to school, and we started paying school fees. And guess what? We couldn't wait for them to finish school. We were so excited. In fact, a couple of years ago, my youngest son, Miles, graduated from high school, and we were so pumped to stop paying school fees. We were so excited. And then that same son, about 6 months ago, was reading the newspaper, and he said, Dad, you'll never believe it. There's an article in the newspaper, and I know you love to go on about how exciting it is to not have to pay school fees anymore. He says grandparents today are now paying the school fees for their grandkids. And I'm like, oh, no, don't tell me that. Then about a year ago now, just over a year ago, in February of last year, our middle daughter, so all of our kids are out of school, our middle daughter got married. And we were so excited when she got married. And her and Jack have been married for a year now. And guess what? My wife and I, we can't wait for them to have grandkids for us. Now, no pressure, Jack and Livy, if you're watching this after the fact, absolutely no pressure. But we're so excited, with the exception of having to maybe pay the school fees for the grandkids, we're still so excited about potentially being grandparents. Isn't it crazy how in every season of life, I have struggled with this thing of artificial urgency, like there was a rush for me to get to the next season. And here's what I've discovered. Maybe you've discovered this, but I've noticed that there's kind of a cultural consensus around this issue, that everyone thinks that bigger is better. And in order to go further, faster, then something's got to be better because it's going faster and it's more efficient. And yet this very thing of artificial urgency has created something in our world today that a lot of medical research and a lot of psychologists and counselors are now referring to, this actual thing called hurry sickness. People are actually getting diagnosed with hurry sickness. And here are some of kind of the symptoms that a lot of people are experiencing when it comes to hurry sickness. Increased anxiety, decreased ability to focus on one thing at a time or even multiple things at a time, the inability to really focus and do deep work, increased frustration, even increase in anger, increase in debt. The list actually of the symptoms is very lengthy. If you go do some research online, you'll find a lot online now about this thing called hurry sickness. And so this morning, you may be sitting there going, well, Perko, this is great group therapy for you. You seem to have this issue of hurry sickness. I'd love to just give you an opportunity to reflect for a moment on a couple of areas of hurry sickness and where they show up, at least in my life, and see if any of these might resonate true for you. As I read them, just kind of reflect on them and say, I wonder if that's true in my life. The first way that I oftentimes see it popping up in my life, number one, is sometimes I feel like everything in life is a bit of a race. Like, for instance, I sometimes pull up to a set of lights and the light's red, and I notice that I'm actually counting how many cars are in each lane at the set of lights and whether or not maybe I should change lanes because there's only 2 in this lane and 3 in this other lane. Some of you are smiling, and I even see some people nudging each other as if, be careful, we're in church. You don't want them to feel as though they're being judged, but maybe it's a partner of yours or a spouse that that's the way they drive. Or perhaps number 2, like me, sometimes multitasking becomes my MO. I find myself actually doing one task, but I'm thinking about another task. And my browser, I use a web browser called Chrome, and the amount of tabs open in my web browser some days, I'm like, wait a second, what am I even working on? Or maybe delays for you are triggering. My wife, Kristen, and I, we travel quite a bit, and I have to be honest that sometimes a delay in travel or a cancellation of a flight can be quite frustrating for us. And I don't know about you if you struggle with delays being triggering for you, but that's something that I've noticed in my life. Always feeling behind. Do you ever feel like you've got more things on your to-do list than you have time to do them in? Feel like you can never get ahead? Maybe you find yourself sometimes in conversations interrupting or talking over another person because you don't have enough time to actually let them finish their sentence or let them finish their story, and you're trying to fill in the end of the sentence for them. Or maybe you just have a little bit of an unhealthy joy when you get to tick things off your to-do list. You're like, oh, wow, that just feels great to be able to mark that off a to-do list. I don't know where that sits with you, but I'm convinced that hurry sickness is something that is a major challenge in our culture today. And yet, when I look at the life of Jesus, when I look at the 4 biographies that we have of Jesus, if you're not familiar with the Bible, maybe you're new to church, new to the whole Bible thing, we have 4 accounts of the life of Jesus. It's called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You'll never guess who wrote those biographies, by the way. Rather than naming them after the person they wrote them about, I found it kind of odd that they called them after themselves. Matthew called his biography Matthew, and it was actually a biography about Jesus, but that's another talk for another day. But Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they gave us an account of Jesus' life, different perspectives on how Jesus lived. Here's what I notice about Jesus. Jesus is incredibly countercultural. He never was in a hurry. He never was racing or running to an appointment. In fact, when you look at all of the accounts of the life of Jesus, you'll notice that Jesus oftentimes walked just about everywhere that he went. Occasionally, he would use a boat or a ship to cross over a body of water, but mostly he would walk everywhere he went. And so this morning, I want us to actually look at an account, a story from the life of Jesus, and I want us to take notice of how Jesus lived his life and the rhythm and the pace at which he lived his life that is so countercultural to our hurried culture that we live in today. Before I take a look at this story, though, I want to just maybe remind you of an invitation, or perhaps this is the first time you've heard this invitation that Jesus gave. He gave this invitation to his followers in the first century, but I think the invitation is still as relevant, if not more relevant, even for us today. Here's the way Jesus invited people to consider the pace of their life. He said this. He said, are you tired? Are you worn out? Maybe even burned out on religion? Then here's the invitation. He says, Hey, come to me. Come to me. Get away with me, and you'll recover your life, he says. I'll show you how to take a real rest. And then he describes exactly how you can learn it. It says, walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. I love that last phrase. Learn to live freely and lightly. I don't know about you, but when I think about my life, freely and lightly, those aren't oftentimes two words that I would describe things in my life as being. In fact, I oftentimes feel like my life feels a little heavy and hard. But I want it to feel free, and I want it to feel light. Whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, I think all of us would say, yeah, I'd like to have a life that doesn't feel heavy and hard, but actually feels free and light. There's a famous story of Jesus in one of the Gospels. In fact, a guy named Mark recorded this story of Jesus that I think is just so helpful when it comes to the idea of what does it look like to watch Jesus and to learn from him these unforced rhythms of grace where my life can begin to feel free and light. The story begins where Jesus is with a crowd of people, and he actually was trying to get away from the crowd. It's really interesting. And so he got in a boat, and he went across a lake, and he went to the other side. And guess what? There was a big, huge crowd of people on the other side of the lake there to meet him. So he couldn't really get away from the crowd. But the story goes on to tell us that there was a religious leader, a guy that was a leader in the synagogue, which is kind of like the Jewish place of worship, who came to Jesus, a guy named Jairus, came to Jesus, and he pleaded with Jesus, begged Jesus to come back to his house because his daughter was very ill. In fact, his daughter was going to die. And so Jesus, instead of like racing over to jump on Jairus' chariot, the Bible actually tells us that Jesus just responded and started walking with Jairus to go back to his house. The story continues. It tells us that the crowd of people that were there on the other side of the lake, they actually followed Jesus, and the crowd was so large that it pressed in around Jesus and his disciples and Jairus as they were on their way back to Jairus' home. Imagine coming out of a stadium, maybe like Sky Stadium or somewhere like that, after a really big rugby match, and you're headed to the train station, you're headed to the buses or whatever, and the whole crowd, thousands of people, all trying to get to the station or to the bus at the same time. You know what it's like. You're trying to get through the crowd, and everyone's pressing in around. This is like not during COVID times where everyone had to be social distancing. But after COVID, we're back to normal, and everyone's pressing around. And that was what was happening in this moment. And then Jesus has the most unusual and odd question, because there was a lady in the crowd who had been suffering from a medical condition for 12 years. It says she had been bleeding for 12 years. In fact, the story tells us that she had spent everything she had going to doctors, trying to get a solution, trying to get healing from this disease, this medical condition that she had. She had spent everything, and she had never been able to find a solution to it. And she had heard about Jesus and knew that Jesus had healed many people. And so as the crowd were pressing in around Jesus, this woman actually comes up behind Jesus, and she reaches out and she touches Jesus' coat. And immediately, the story tells us, she was healed from this condition she had suffered with for 12 years. An incredible story. And then Jesus, in the midst of this crowd, knowing that some power had left him, has the most unusual, I've got to be honest, the most odd question that he asks the people around him. He stops and he says, "Hey, who touched me?" Of which, if I were there, I would have said to myself, "Jesus, are you kidding me?" like everyone's touching you at the moment. But yet Jesus knew that something unique had happened. And so Jesus kind of doubles down after his disciples are like, "Hey, what are you talking about? Everyone's pressing in on you. Everyone's touching you." Jesus keeps going and says, no, somebody touched me. Finally, this woman, she comes over to Jesus. and she's really fearful. In fact, the story tells us that she was even trembling. She was terrified. She comes to Jesus and she tells him everything that happened, that she was the one who touched him. And I love Jesus' response to her. Jesus says to her, "Your faith is the thing that has healed you." She says, "Go in peace," he says to her. "You are freed from your suffering." I don't know if you're here today at church, maybe for the first time, or maybe you're here for the first time in a long time. But oftentimes when you come to church for the first time, or maybe you haven't been in a long time, you can kind of feel a little bit of anxiety. You might even feel a little bit of, like a friend of mine said to me one time, I feel a lot of imposter syndrome when I go to church. Like, I feel like I'm supposed to be something, but I know I'm not that. That's kind of how this person felt when they went to Jesus. But I love Jesus' response. He says to this woman, "Your faith, your belief in me is the thing that has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." I think Jesus would say the same thing to you today. If you're terrified or maybe coming to church feeling a little imposter syndrome, I think Jesus would want you to be freed from that suffering and just say to you, "Hey, listen, it's your faith in me. That's what heals you. You want to be forgiven of what you've done wrong? Believe in me," Jesus would say, "and go in peace. Be freed from your suffering." Now, you may be wondering at this point in the story, like, "Hey, Jesus, did you forget about Jairus' daughter that is literally dying?" Like, Jairus came to Jesus not with artificial urgency, pleading with Jesus, but he came to Jesus actually needing Jesus to hurry back to his house in order to heal his daughter before she died. And maybe you're wondering, like, "Hey, why did Jesus stop and take the time to ask the question, 'Who touched me?' What's happening with his daughter?" Well, it says that while Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader, and it says that they told him, "Your daughter is dead." Could you imagine being Jairus in this story? Like, "Hey, an hour ago I came and asked you to come to my place, and for some reason you were really concerned about who touched you, and we've wasted all this time." They went on to say, "Why bother the teacher even more? Why even bother him anymore? Your daughter's dead, Jairus. It's over." The story continues. It tells us this, that on the next slide, it says that overhearing what they had said, Jesus told Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just believe." I don't know if you've ever been around like church people or religious people. Sometimes I feel like I've been guilty of giving kind of simple answers to really complex, challenging life issues. Like, "Oh, it'll be fine. Just pray about it." Or, "It'll be fine. Just believe." I feel like in this moment, Jesus is almost giving what I would call a very simple answer to Jairus' very complex issue. He's just been told that his daughter has died. Jesus says, "Don't be afraid. Just believe." The story continues. In the next verse, it says, "He did not let anyone follow him except for Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the home of the synagogue leader Jairus, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. This little girl has just died." Can you imagine the scene that they must have come upon? In the next verse, we hear that Jesus he went in and said to them, "Why is all this commotion and wailing going on? The child is not dead. She's just asleep." But they laughed at him. They had been there and watched this girl pass away, and they laughed at him. And then Jesus goes on. It says, after he had put them all out of the house, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Incredible what happens next. It says, immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. Notice the detail that Mark gives us in this little parentheses in the story. And she was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. Remember how long the lady had been suffering from that medical condition? 12 years. It's almost as if Jesus knew on this day, 12 years ago, a woman would reach out and touch his cloak and be healed of something she had been suffering from for so long. It's almost as if Jesus knew 12 years ago when this girl was born that he would come to Jairus' house that day and he would heal this little girl. I love what the author and speaker, a guy named Mike Todd, says about Jesus. He says this: Jesus walks at a pace of grace. He's never in a hurry. He's not in a rush. Jesus walks at a pace of grace. And here's what I think Jesus invites you and I into in our world today. Jesus invites us to live at a pace where we can both experience his grace and extend his grace to other people. We can experience his grace, but we can also extend his grace to others as well. So let me ask you this question. I want to ask you a question. What area of your life do you feel like you need to slow down in order to experience God's grace in your life today? Maybe one of those things that I mentioned I struggle with, like showing up at a set of lights and finding which lane has the least amount of cars. Maybe that resonated with you, or maybe you always feel like you're behind on your to-do list. I don't know where it is for you, but I think all of us have to ask and wrestle with the question, what area of my life do I need to slow down so that I can experience God's grace in my life? And then a follow-up question. I think this is a really important question as well. Not only what area do I need to slow down to experience God's grace, but what area of my life do I need to slow down in order to extend God's grace to other people? I've found for myself an area that's been really helpful for me is when I see myself checking out at a grocery store, or maybe I'm going through a line at an airport or something, and instead of finding that checkout line that has nobody in it so I can get out the door quickly, I've found myself choosing to get into a line, I know it sounds crazy, where there are other people actually in front of me. So I can have a conversation with them and maybe extend a little bit of God's grace to them by just saying hello and asking them how their day is going. What area of your life do you need to slow down to experience God's grace and to extend God's grace to other people? There's a famous quote from a famous author which has kind of stuck with me. He was asked a question by another guy who's also now a famous author. He asked him this simple question. A guy named Dallas Willard was asked the question, hey, what do you think the secret of living the Christian life looks like? And Dallas answered this guy with a simple answer. John Ortberg was the guy asking the question. And he said, John, you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. You want to know the secret to living the Christian life? Dallas said to John, John, you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. And then John wrote that down, and then he followed up and asked Dallas, okay, that's great. What next? Dallas said to him, John, you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. Full stop. So, as we think about our lives and the pace that we're living at today, perhaps we can learn like Jesus invited us to do. Walk with me, work with me, watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I think Jesus is inviting us to live at a slower pace. I've kind of written it down for myself in my journal, and I've got this posted in a couple of places in my world. I write it this way. I say, Jason, life is not a race, so live at a slower pace. Perko, life is not a race. It's not a race, so live at a slower pace. Live at a pace where you can both experience God's grace and extend God's grace to others. Let me pray for us this morning.